Let's get straight to our panel tonight. Sky News contributor Joe Hildebrand's with us and Amanda Rose from Small Business Women Australia. Joe, I want to get on to the Australian Open in a moment, but before I get there, you're a great student of the absurd. Try and explain this for me. Australia has a bunch of helicopters called Taipans. They've had some safety issues, but experts tell us they're a pretty good bit of gear. Ukraine's fighting a war against the Russians and don't have enough military hardware. And some peanut in defence says, no, what we need to do is take these things apart and bury them in the desert. How's that make any sense?
Yeah, I really just do not understand this. And I think that Australian politics and probably all political systems, all governments, are bedevilled by minutiae. They're bedevilled by bureaucrats, I think, who see something in front of them thinking, right, I've got to tick all these boxes. Oh, there could be an OH&S issue here. You know, you wouldn't want to send, you wouldn't want anyone to be unsafe in a war zone. And so, and so they think, all right, well, we've got to do all these little things. And there's no one actually just looking at the overall big picture and saying, right, how can we actually make this work in both cases? And that, of course, is what our elected representatives are meant to do. And Richard Marles is a pretty sensible guy most of the time, so I do find it passing strange that there has been, as reported in the Oz today, this resistance, or the fact that, I'm not sure if it's even been a resistance. It seems like this request from Kiev for more support, more equipment, has just got lost in this kind of Byzantine bureaucracy somewhere. So, yes, it is absurd, and unfortunately it's absurd, and as a result, potentially more people are dying than should in eastern Ukraine.
Yeah, it's great fodder for utopia, I would have thought. Let's get on to the Australian Open now. I mentioned at the beginning of the program that the Australian Open is celebrating everything but Australia Day. They've got First Nations Day, that's fine. Yvonne Goolagong-Cawley was there, that was great. They have Pride Day, they've got All Abilities Day, all that stuff's fine. But they're going to ignore completely our National Day, which I just find disgraceful. Amanda, surely the Australian Open on the 26th of January, which is in the middle of the tournament, getting into the semi-finals, could find 5 minutes to say, we love being here in Australia, surely.
Look, this is very, very disappointing. And look, I'm an Australian Day ambassador for Georges River Council, and I am really saddened by it because when you think about it, Australia means bringing people together. We have such a mix of cultures in this country, and really, if you go overseas and you mention Australia, they think, oh, you guys are so cool and you get along with everyone. And just to wipe it completely, and for the Australian Open, I mean, really, if they want to get rid of it, get rid of the word Australia in the match or on the tournament altogether. But really, this is an opportunity to bring people together, and I think that's what they're missing. So instead of seeing it as, look, we're upsetting a certain group of society, and fair enough, everyone has a right to be upset about certain things, but overall, big picture is how can we bring people together and how can we celebrate all the wonderful things that our country has to offer?
Joe, News Limited Papers broke this story today, and when you dig into it, it gets even worse. So each year at the Australian Open, you have an Australian legend, which is going into a Hall of Fame. But what they do down in Melbourne, they have bronze busts of former famous tennis players. This year it's going to be Lleyton Hewitt, who couldn't get a more Australian than Lleyton Hewitt.
He's as Aussie as Vegemite.
The thing and throwing his hat around. Exactly right. So what have they done? They've changed the date of that event from Australia Day, when it used to be, to the 24th, 2 days earlier. I mean, this is just crazy wokeness gone absolutely mad.
Yeah, and more importantly, I think it's just, as you mentioned earlier, it's just that absurdity of it. The idea, firstly, that these sorts of ridiculous virtue signalling gestures are going to make any difference, are going to have any material benefit to the lives of disadvantaged Indigenous communities is absolutely ridiculous. In fact, it puts people off even considering or wanting to address these issues, because they think that in addressing Indigenous issues and helping Indigenous people, that means that everyone else has to lose something, that this is some kind of zero-sum game. And it's this sort of stuff. I was a big Yes supporter and campaigner, and I can tell you absolutely, card-carrying fact, London to a brick, this sort of stuff is what cost the Yes vote its victory. This sort of stuff is why it went from 60% pro-yes to 60% no. And it's just so counterproductive, self-destructive, idiotic. I mean, you could use any name under the book. It's the same as things like, the Triple J Hottest 100 moving from the 26th of January to the 25th. I mean, Great, that's fine. And let me just check the Closing the Gap report. Did that do anything? No, nothing. It's madness. And the idea that you would, just pretend that the day doesn't exist. And we know that 2/3 of Australians want Australia Day on the 26th of January. If anything, like the Australian Open, it's a great sort of bookend to the summer holidays. It's a great sort of last hurrah. No one's going around celebrating genocide. In fact, the official protocols of Australia Day, as Amanda would know, is not just to celebrate, but also to reflect. So we reflect on our past. We think about how we can better embrace Indigenous people and make sure that they aren't excluded from society. And it's a great day for migrants as well. I mean, the strongest support for Australia Day comes from people from overseas, people who have come here from overseas, who are desperate to become citizens and share in our bounty. It's madness, this stuff.
Amanda, the two males on this desk are going to tiptoe very carefully around this next issue and leave it entirely up to you. I speak, of course, of tennis legend Martina Navratilova. Now, she's had a go at Naomi Osaka after she lost her first-round match at the Australian Open. Have a listen to Martina.
She couldn't get to the ball that she wants to hit because she's not in shape. I'm surprised that she really started playing, that she got on the tour, that she played this tournament without clearly being in the top shape that she needs to be.
Now, Amanda, we know that Naomi had a baby, I think 6 months ago. If a bloke had said this, there'd be calls for his head. Over to you while Joe and I just sit and listen.
Look, the fact that she's playing after having a baby 6 months ago is phenomenal, and I think that should be celebrated to begin with. Now, the issue I find wasn't that she was talking about fitness, because a lot of people talk about fitness of male and female. It was that she actually compared her to another lady who had a baby 6 months prior, saying, well, she was able to do it and you're not. So the second you start comparing people, then we get into really murky waters, because really she was saying fitness is fitness, male, female, that way it's fair, but then to point that out is quite insulting. And really, I would much prefer pointing out the positives of someone, because I'm sure she's well aware of her level of fitness, and I think we should be celebrating the fact that a mother who's given birth 6 months prior is competing at such a huge tournament.